The day my father looked me in the eye inside the Meridian Medical Center boardroom and said, "Brittany's nose job is the priority right now." I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just slid a manila envelope across that conference table and watched the color drain from his face. But let me back up. Because for you to understand what happened in that room, you need to understand what it took me to save $85,000 on a nurse's salary in Portland, Oregon, and exactly how long my own family had been lying to my face. My name is Elise Merritt. I'm 31 years old, and I was born with a congenital spinal condition that, by my mid-20s, had made simple things, standing for more than an hour, sleeping through the night, carrying groceries, feel like punishment. My doctors at Meridian had a solution, a specialized corrective surgery. Not cheap, not quick to schedule, but life-changing. The total cost? $85,000. So I worked. I picked up double shifts. I skipped vacations. I said no to dinners, to concerts, to a social life that most people my age took for granted. Every dollar I saved went into a joint family account that my father, Douglas Merritt, had convinced me was safer and better managed that way. He was a financial advisor with 30 years of experience. I trusted him completely. That was my first mistake. My mother, Carol, smiled every Sunday at our family dinners on Hawthorne Boulevard like everything was fine. My sister Brittany talked about her upcoming rhinoplasty like it was a birthday party. And Douglas just sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, the way a man looks when he knows a secret nobody else in the room has figured out yet. I hadn't figured it out yet, but Aunt Peggy had, and what she found in those bank statements would change everything. She had been watching Douglas for months, and the number she showed me that night made my hands go completely cold. It was a Tuesday night in February when Aunt Peggy called me. No small talk, no, "How are you?" Just, "Elise, I need you to come over, tonight, and don't tell your father." Peggy Harlow had always been the odd one out at Merritt family gatherings, too direct, too observant, too unwilling to laugh at Douglas's jokes the way everyone else did. He called her difficult. Carol avoided her at holidays, but Peggy had spent 22 years working in bank compliance in Seattle before retiring to Portland, and she had an eye for numbers that most people in our family couldn't begin to match. When I walked into her house on Selwood that night, she had her laptop open and a printed stack of bank statements spread across her kitchen table. "Sit down," she said. "This is going to take a minute." Over the next 2 hours, Peggy walked me through every transaction in that joint account going back 18 months, withdrawals I had never authorized, transfers to an account I had never seen, and a single payment, $15,000, dated just 6 weeks earlier, made directly to Cascade Aesthetic Surgery Clinic. Brittany's consultation had been in December. I remembered because she had shown up to Christmas dinner talking about her glow-up year. I sat there staring at that number for a long time. "There's more," Peggy said quietly. The total missing from my surgery fund was $85,000. Every single dollar I had saved over 6 years. Gone. Moved in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags. Spread across 14 separate transactions, with Douglas listed as the sole authorized manager. He hadn't stolen from a joint account. He had engineered one specifically designed so he could. I drove to my parents' house that same night. I needed to hear it from him directly. Douglas was in his study when I knocked. I told him what I had found. I asked him calmly to explain. He leaned back in his chair, looked at me the way you look at someone who has just said something mildly inconvenient, and said, "Your sister needs this more than you do. You're strong. You'll figure it out." Carol stood in the doorway behind me and said absolutely nothing. That silence told me everything I needed to know about who she really was. They thought I would fall apart. They thought I would cry, beg, forgive, just like I always had. But that night, something shifted inside me, and I already knew exactly what I was going to do next. I drove home from that house on Hawthorne Boulevard, and I did not cry until I was inside my apartment with the door locked behind me. I gave myself exactly 1 hour. 1 hour to feel every single thing. The betrayal, The years of double shifts, the vacations I never took, the friendships I let go cold because I was always working, always saving, always believing that the people who were supposed to love me most were keeping my future safe. Then I washed my face, made coffee, and called Peggy back. "I'm not going to beg them," I told her. "I'm going to bury them." Peggy didn't flinch. She had already anticipated my call. She told me she had a contact, a former colleague from her compliance days named Robert Finch, who specialized in financial fraud cases in Oregon. She had already sent him a preliminary summary of the transactions. He had already used the word criminal. Over the next 6 weeks, Peggy and I worked in complete silence. No confrontations, no hints. I still showed up to Sunday dinners on Hawthorne Boulevard and watched Douglas carve the roast like a man without a single thing on his conscience. I watched Carol pass the breadbasket with that soft smile of hers. I watched Brittany scroll through before and after rhinoplasty photos at the dinner table like it was the most normal thing in the world, and I smiled right back at all of them, because Robert Finch had finished his report, because every fraudulent transaction was now documented, time-stamped, and formatted into a 43-page brief, because I had already contacted the Patient Advocacy Office at Meridian Medical Center and requested a formal board review meeting, citing financial misconduct directly connected to a pending surgical case. The meeting was scheduled for March 14th. Douglas had no idea he was on the guest list. I had waited 6 years to get that surgery. I could wait 6 more weeks to get my justice. But first, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Because what happened inside that Meridian Medical Center boardroom on March 14th, you are not going to see it coming. March 14th was a gray, quiet morning in Portland. The kind of day where the sky sits low and everything feels still. I remember driving to Meridian Medical Center on Interstate 5 with the 43-page brief in a manila envelope on the passenger seat beside me, and feeling something I hadn't felt in months, completely calm. I had asked Peggy to be there. She sat 2 seats down from me at that long conference table in the 4th-floor boardroom, dressed like the former bank compliance officer she was. Navy blazer, reading glasses, a second copy of Robert Finch's report already in her hands. Across from us sat 3 members of the Meridian Patient Advocacy Board, including the director, a woman named Helen Bradshaw, who had taken my initial complaint seriously enough to schedule this meeting in the first place. And then Douglas walked in. He had no idea what the meeting was actually about. I had listed it internally as a surgical funding dispute requiring family clarification. He thought he was coming to explain a minor financial misunderstanding. He walked in wearing his best charcoal blazer, Carol 2 steps behind him, Brittany on her phone, and he looked across that table at me with an expression that said he had already decided how this was going to go. He sat down, straightened his jacket, and before Helen Bradshaw could even open the meeting, Douglas looked directly at Helen and said, "Let's make this quick. Brittany's $15,000 procedure at Cascade Aesthetic is a medical priority for our family right now. And frankly, Elise has always had a tendency to dramatize her situation." Helen Bradshaw looked at him for a moment without expression. Then she looked at me. I slid the manila envelope across the table. "Mr. Merritt," Helen said, opening the brief, "we're not here to discuss your younger daughter's rhinoplasty. We're here because a formal fraud complaint has been filed with this hospital's patient advocacy office, citing the misappropriation of $85,000 in documented surgical funds saved specifically for a procedure scheduled at this facility." The room went very quiet. I watched Douglas's jaw tighten. I watched Carol's hand reach for her purse strap, the way people grab for something solid when the ground starts moving. I watched Brittany finally look up from her phone. "This is ridiculous," Douglas said. His voice was still steady, but his neck had gone red above his collar. "This is a private family financial matter, and it has no place in a hospital boardroom." "It does," Helen said calmly, "when it constitutes criminal fraud against a patient of this institution." She slid 3 pages of the brief toward the board members beside her. Robert Finch's transaction analysis. 14 withdrawals, 14 dates, one $15,000 payment to Cascade Aesthetic Surgery Clinic, Douglas Merritt's signature on every single authorization. Helen picked up the phone on the conference table. She dialed. She asked for Portland Police non-emergency dispatch, and she did it without breaking eye contact with Douglas for even 1 second. That was the moment his face went completely white. Carol started crying. Brittany pushed her chair back from the table like she was trying to physically distance herself from what her father had just become in that room. And Douglas, the man who had sat at the head of that dinner table for 30 years like he was untouchable, just stared at those 14 transaction sheets and said nothing. For the first time in my entire life, Douglas Merritt had absolutely nothing to say. And the silence that came out of him felt like the first clean breath I had taken in 6 years. The police arrived at Meridian Medical Center 18 minutes later. But what happened to Douglas, Carol, and Brittany after that door closed? That's the part that will stay with you. Douglas Merritt was formally charged with financial fraud and misappropriation of funds in Multnomah County 3 weeks after that boardroom meeting. Robert Finch's 43-page brief was submitted directly to the district attorney's office. The 14 transactions, the timestamps, the $15,000 payment to Cascade Aesthetic Surgery Clinic. Every single page held up exactly the way Peggy said it would. He didn't go to trial. He took a plea. As part of the settlement, Douglas was required to repay the full $85,000, plus legal fees and a civil penalty that brought the total closer to $112,000. His financial advisor license in Oregon was suspended pending a separate ethics review. The man who had managed other people's money for 30 years couldn't manage the consequences of stealing from his own daughter. Carol never apologized. Not once. She sent me a single text message 3 days after the boardroom. "You really didn't have to take it this far, Elise?" I read it once, screenshot it for my attorney, and never responded. Brittany did not get her nose job. Cascade Aesthetic Surgery Clinic was notified of the fraud investigation and froze the pending procedure immediately. Last I heard, she had moved back into the house on Hawthorne Boulevard and was telling people in Portland that our family had been torn apart by a misunderstanding. My surgery at Meridian Medical Center was scheduled for June 11th. I walked into that hospital on a gray Portland morning, the same kind of low, quiet sky as March 14th, and I walked out 11 days later, able to sleep through the night for the first time in 7 years. Peggy was in the recovery room when I woke up. She had brought terrible coffee from the hospital cafeteria, and she was sitting in the chair beside my bed, reading a crossword puzzle like it was the most ordinary day in the world. Maybe for her it was, but for me, it was the first day of a life that actually belonged to me. And nobody, not Douglas, not Carol, not Brittany, would ever put their hands on it again. If this story hit you the way I think it did, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you've ever had your trust broken by the people who were supposed to protect you most, leave a comment below. I read every single one. New stories every week, and I'll see you in the next one.